Story 1. The Split Stone of Clingman's Dome. Most folks climb Clingman's Dome for the view, but Eddie Green wasn't that kind of man. A third-generation hunter from Gatlinburg, Eddie believed the dome held more than ridgeline beauty. It hid what his grandpa used to call the cursed spine of the deer spirit. That phrase never meant much until the winter of 2021, when Eddie found a narrow animal trail just off the Appalachian Trail, tucked under low pine. What made him veer off path wasn't instinct. It was the unmistakable shape of a standing stone. It jutted out like a jagged molar, covered in lichen and what looked like a hand-carved antler motif, split straight down the middle like it had been cracked from inside out. The area was unnaturally quiet. Eddie, seasoned as he was, could read stillness like a book. No squirrels, no wind. Just a dull thrum in his eardrums, like static in a radio. He touched the stone out of habit. That night at camp, the air turned thick, like breathing soup. His fire wouldn't light, his flashlight flickered. And sometime around 2:33 a.m., the woods echoed with something awful. A single echoing deer cry, but twisted, like it was coming from a mouth that hadn't evolved to make it. The next morning, all his deer snares were sprung, but instead of blood, each had a neat tuft of his own beard hair tied into the trip wire. That would have rattled any man. But what sent Eddie spiraling wasn't that. It was what he saw etched into the ash circle where his fire failed. A spiral of hooves, each print perfect, as if a deer had danced in place, with only 2 legs. When Eddie made it back, he swore never to return. But 2 weeks later, hikers found him wandering down the trail, barefoot, mumbling in Cherokee. He didn't speak the language. He was clutching a stone shard, half of the deer carving etched onto it. His eyes rolled white like snow blindness. They say he never slept again without hearing hooves tapping just behind his head. Story 2. The hunter who mocked the stone near Blood Mountain. In the ridgelines near Blood Mountain, where the Appalachian Trail carves its way past mossy switchbacks and ancient Cherokee burial sites, a man named Tyler Red Carmichael made his reputation not just as a hunter, but as a loudmouth skeptic. Red mocked every local superstition from witches to wendigos. But he saved his special scorn for the deer stones, those standing markers locals whispered about with stiff whiskey lips. So when a hiker named Janelle tipped him off to a strange, antler-etched boulder tucked behind Slaughter Creek, Red couldn't resist. He bushwhacked into the brush with a GoPro strapped to his chest, carrying a flask and an attitude. When he reached the stone, taller than he expected, glistening with faint green moss and a long fissure down its center, he started taunting it, even pissing on its base like a dog on a hydrant. "Your curse ain't worth a buck's fart," he barked to the lens. But after that clip, the GoPro footage goes black for 11 seconds, and when it returns, Red's face is different, his cockiness replaced with a flat, eerie silence. The next frame shows him walking deeper into the woods, but his gait is wrong, jerky, too fluid in the knees, like something watching how humans move and trying to mimic it. He vanished for 2 days. A search crew found him near Wolf Laurel Top, slumped against a tree with deep scratches down his forearms. He was barefoot, and his feet had been deliberately split between the toes like hooves. Medical staff thought it was frostbite mutilation. But what chilled the coroner was that the cuts were cauterized from the inside out. Red never spoke again, not even when shown the footage. He just stared at his hands, like they weren't his. The GoPro? It shut down at 3:03 a.m. with the battery full. The last audio file was just a heartbeat, thudding steadily until it wasn't. Story 3. The farmer who dug beneath the stone in Shady Valley. They call it Bone Hollow behind Shady Valley, Tennessee, where an old farmer named Eli Buchanan found a deer stone at the edge of his property in 2021 after a landslide exposed part of a stone ridge. He wasn't a superstitious man. Eli had lived through droughts, the '89 barn fire, even a bear attack. But the way the rock was carved, a horned stag with a spiral where its heart should be, unsettled him. He tried ignoring it, but his cows started refusing to graze near the area. One heifer was found with its legs snapped backward, no tracks around. Eli, ever the pragmatist, decided to dig it out, convinced it was messing with the soil's minerals. As he clawed at the base, he unearthed bones. Deer, yes, but arranged unnaturally in tight circular patterns. Underneath them, a small copper bowl filled with hardened black resin and what looked like teeth. That night, Eli dreamt he was crawling inside a stag's belly, the ribs folding around him like jail bars. When he woke, there were cloven hoof prints circling his house, on the roof, on the porch, even across the frost-covered windows. The next week, he called a local historian, Martha Clay, to inspect what he'd found. But when she arrived, Eli was gone. No signs of struggle, no blood. Just the bowl sitting neatly on the porch with the resin melted, steaming despite the morning chill. The strange part? His security camera glitched from 2:57 to 3:09 a.m. When the footage returned, it showed something impossibly tall standing in the center of the yard. It had antlers. But the head. Story 4. The brothers who tried to burn the stone. In Old Fort, North Carolina. In the dense pine thickets just beyond Andrews Geyser near Old Fort, North Carolina, twin brothers Caleb and Josiah Mercer discovered something unusual while clearing trails for a private hunting lease. A broken deer stone, half buried in red clay. Its antler carving split clean through. The stone wasn't just cracked. It looked deliberately sawed in half, as if someone had tried to sever whatever it represented. The locals warned them, especially an old Cherokee woman who passed their truck and muttered something about horns in the holler. But Caleb, a welder, and Josiah, an Army vet, weren't the type to scare easy. They hauled the stone into their trailer and brought it back to their property, intending to crush it with thermite in a makeshift burn pit. "Let's melt this cursed thing down and see what bleeds," Caleb joked. They set up a camera and ignited the thermite. At first, the chemical reaction flared like expected. But then the fire twisted, pulled inward, forming a spiral of ash and smoke that stayed frozen in midair. The footage showed something pushing through the flame, antlers first, but the cam shorted out. Their dog Daisy took off into the woods, howling like her tail was on fire. That night, Josiah began mumbling in his sleep, repeating Cherokee words he didn't speak. Caleb woke to find hoof prints on the ceiling above his bed and a dead fawn gutted on their porch, no signs of forced entry. The next morning, Josiah was gone. His bed neatly made, his boots by the door. Caleb followed tracks to the burn pit, now completely cold, and found a single glove half melted into the soil. Inside the glove was his brother's wedding ring, still warm. Days later, Caleb disappeared too. Locals claim they see two tall figures walking the woods near the geyser at dawn, antlers catching the mist light. They walk in perfect sync. Story 5. The campers who heard the whistle near Tellico River. It was supposed to be a reunion trip. 5 college friends, now in their 30s, gathering for one last weekend of camping before life swallowed them up for good. They pitched tents along the Tellico River in eastern Tennessee, close to the North Carolina line. One of them, Marcus, wandered a bit farther upriver looking for firewood and returned pale, muttering about a weird old boulder carved like a deer skull, with a hole drilled through the mouth. The others laughed it off, just some forgotten folk art, right? That night, after the fire had burned low and the whiskey bottles were nearly dry, someone whistled from the woods. Not just any whistle. 3 short bursts, sharp and melodic, followed by silence. At first, they thought it was a prank. Then the same sequence repeated. Closer. They shined flashlights in every direction, but nothing moved. At 3:07 a.m., their phones all buzzed with no signal. Then Marcus started whistling in his sleep. The same pattern. Over and over. When they shook him awake, he screamed like he'd been burned. He didn't speak for the rest of the trip. In the morning, they found small rocks stacked on each of their tents. 7 high, precise, like totems. Marcus finally explained that when he leaned in to inspect the deer skull carving, he thought he saw an eye blink inside the mouth hole. He felt something enter him, cold and wet, like a breath. On their way out, their tires shredded on perfectly placed nails, 3 per tire, forming little spirals. When the tow truck arrived, the driver took one look at their fire pit and asked, "Y'all been whistling at night?" They hadn't. Not intentionally. Back home, Marcus disappeared a week later. The voicemail he left before going silent was just one thing. Repeated 3 short whistles. Then a long silence. Then breathing. Story 6. The boy who took the antler chip in White Top, Virginia. In the small highland town of White Top, a boy named Jonah and his grandfather would often wander the woods behind their cabin, following deer trails with old rifles slung over their shoulders and hot cocoa in thermoses. In late autumn of 2023, they stumbled across something half-buried near a dried creek bed. A weather-worn deer stone snapped down the middle, its antlers chipped, revealing layers of blackened, glinting rock underneath. Jonah, curious and stubborn, pocketed a fragment that looked like it had once been the tip of a carved antler. He thought it might be obsidian. That night, he tucked it under his pillow. By midnight, he began sleep-talking, chanting in some guttural rhythm that chilled his grandfather to the bone. "He's whistling to me through the trees," Jonah muttered again and again. The next day, the chip was missing, though neither of them had touched it. Their house began creaking at odd times, and they noticed deer standing at the edge of the woods each dusk, dozens of them, silent, unmoving, always watching the boy's bedroom window. One morning, they found hoofprints in the hallway, etched deep into the hardwood, leading up to Jonah's bed and vanishing. The local ranger suggested coyotes, but coyotes don't stand upright. Jonah began drawing spirals over and over in charcoal, all over the walls, floor, his arms. Then one night, he stood at the edge of the woods and whispered something that made his grandfather weep. "He says the broken ones must be carried home again." Jonah walked into the forest and didn't come back. All they ever found was the melted remains of his thermos, and that same obsidian shard, placed neatly on the porch the next morning, warm to the touch, as if it had just been pulled from a fire beneath the mountain. Story 7. The veteran who buried the final stone near Cades Cove. They say Cades Cove is haunted, but for Travis Keene, a retired Marine who moved there for peace and solitude, the ghosts had always lived in his head. Until 2022. On a solo hiking trip near the less-traveled Gregory Ridge Trail, he came across a half-circle of blackened trees in the middle of a clearing. At the center was a deer stone, so old it was cracked in 4 places, with moss growing out of its etched eyes. Travis, who'd seen the worst of Fallujah, wasn't easily rattled. But the way the stone seemed to hum when he stepped near it made his stomach turn. He swore he heard static, like from a broken radio. That night, he dreamt of deer walking backward, mouths stitched shut with barbed wire. The next morning, claw marks were raked across his back door. Not bear, not cougar, something taller. That afternoon, A voice on his shortwave radio whispered coordinates he didn't understand, along with his own name repeated over and over. It wasn't a broadcast. No one else heard it. Travis, shaken and spiraling, did the only thing he could think of. He hiked back with a shovel, dug deep, and buried the deer stone under a foot of earth, surrounding it with salt and a Marine Corps Challenge coin. The moment he tamped the dirt down, the forest went dead quiet. Not a bird, not a breeze. He turned and walked home, never speaking of it again. But he left his GoPro running, strapped to a tree across the clearing. When he reviewed the footage, the last few seconds showed something rise from the earth, not fully formed, just outlines and antlers, and tilt its head toward the lens. The feed cut to black as it stepped forward. Travis died of a heart attack 2 weeks later. But the GoPro was still recording, and someone, somewhere, uploaded the last frame. A figure with deer legs, eyes like embers, and Travis's voice whispering, "The 7th is sealed. For now."